there's a new function called XLookup. You may have heard of the function called Vlookup. Well, the XLookup is an improvement to that Vlookup. The Vlookup is a function where if you're given, let's say, a product number, and then you have some master list somewhere, and in that master list you have, let's say, 500 columns. Out of those 500 columns, you're interested in just returning information that's happening in one particular column. Now, when you do a Vlookup, your master list that you have has to contain what you're trying to find, your lookup value, but that can only be positioned in the first column of that whole table. Now, that's often a bit of a problem for people because sometimes it's not given to them in that way. The lookup value is positioned somewhere in the middle amongst all those 500 columns. So what people often do is cut that column and stick it to the front, and then off they go with their Vlookup function. Now, instead of having to do all of that, you can now use the new function called XLookup. Let me take you through what the Vlookup does so that you can then understand the benefits of the XLookup. Now, the Vlookup can only look for your lookup value in the first column. It can only find the nearest lowest match or the exact match. So that's where you put either the true or the false bit at the very end. That's often or can sometimes be a bit of a problem or an issue. The other thing is you might have done a Vlookup function and it's come back with an error. It comes back and it says NA. Now, NA might be correct because no, I can't find that product code in that master list, but it's not pretty to see the NA. So we add another function, we nest another function to our existing Vlookup function. So to the beginning of our Vlookup function, we add equals, if error, open bracket, and then the rest of the Vlookup function. When you get to the end of the Vlookup function, there's a bracket there. You go for a comma, and then in quote marks, you can put in your comment or your statement. Check code, discontinued, out of order. Now, that's two functions that you have to use to get your final result. But there's something else that often happens to us when we're using the Vlookup. Sometimes you need to do not just one Vlookup, but you need to do 2 or 3 or 4 more Vlookups, which means you have to, out of 500 columns, you have to go off counting the column number that has the description or the person's name or some kind of a code. So you have to sit there going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Wait, 8. Okay, 100. And then type in the column number of 100 in there. Now, this can be a bit of a pain in the butt. The other thing that can happen is somebody changes the description. They could change the description and go, no, I don't want the description or the item, I want the cost or I want the name of a person. Now, if you change the heading description, well, it means your Vlookup is not bringing up the correct piece of information. So you have to go in there to the column piece of information, take out column reference number, 100, 200, whatever we had, and then change it to the next one. The last thing you want to do is leave that for your end user to muck around with. So to overcome that, you could add another function in that spot where the column reference is, where the 2, the 3, the 5 column index number is, and replace it with a match function. Now, the match function says, right, if I give you this piece of text, go to this chunk of data and count how many times until you found that piece of text. And the return is a number. Yep, I found it in 2 jumps across, 3 jumps across, 8 jumps across. And that gives you your column number piece of information. So there you add that into your Vlookup. So far to get the Vlookup to do, what I want, I need an if error, I need a Vlookup, and then I need a match function. You can scrap all of that and use the XLookup function. The XLookup function, when you start to use it, you select your lookup value, say go look for this value in this column of information, which could be located absolutely anywhere. And then it asks you for what is the return array, what do you want to give me back? In the VLOOKUP, remember, we had to select columns and columns and columns and columns of data and then tell us, yeah, go jump X amount of times. In this one, you can select just the column that actually has the information that you want to return. Now, you can bring that in and it can do the exact match, just like the VLOOKUP does. You can do the nearest lowest, but if you then say, okay, hang on a minute, I need to find the nearest highest, you couldn't do that with the VLOOKUP. The XLookup does. The other thing it does is it has a wildcard character. Sometimes what you're trying to look for is like, I only half remember the story. I only half remember how the coding went, or the description was written, or what that person's name was. I remember their name was Analia and then something, something, something. You can now put in, for example, Analia asterisk. So the asterisk is the symbol for the wildcard character, meaning any number of characters after this point. In other words, find anything starting with Analia and then whatever else. And when you do your XLookup, you can ask it to say, I'm going to refer to my lookup value is going to have a wildcard character, so look for it that way. Another feature of the XLookup is that I used to, as a trainer, I get asked, okay, but the person's name appears 3 times in the list and I want the first occurrence or I want the last occurrence. Forget it if you want somewhere in the middle, you might need something else. But so what the return the last match will do is you can ask it to do the searching instead of top to bottom, from the bottom up. Okay. Now, if this is all very hard to follow, that's okay, but I do have a YouTube video. If you just YouTube Analia Pisani, you'll be able to find exactly what I'm describing here for you. But the XLookup function is so much nicer to use rather than the VLOOKUP, or you may have used index and match together to get what you needed because maybe you needed to do the nearest highest. Well, now you've got the XLookup function that will do all of this for you. We also do offer virtual training and face-to-face training if you're in Sydney, Australia. You can find me at azsolutions.com.au.